We're live.
There we go.
Wonderful. Love technology. Hi, everyone. Congressman Tom Emmer here, kicking off our second Twitter Town Hall. We've gathered questions from Facebook, Twitter, and our website, and now I'm going to answer as many as I can. Today marks my 14th Town Hall since taking office. We've held town halls through social media like we're going to do today. Some we've held over the telephone, and many in-person town halls. In fact, we've now done a town hall in every county that I represent. Remember, I work for you, and I want to hear from you. We take this responsibility seriously, and we want our work here in Congress to be transparent, accountable, and most importantly, we want to be accessible. Today is an opportunity for you to ask questions and to discuss the issues that are most important to you. A huge part of my job here in Congress is to listen, not to talk. I want to hear what concerns you have, what legislation you support or oppose, and what actions you would like to see from this office. So never hesitate to reach out to myself personally or to one of our offices. Anyone can help you. You can find us by actually, I would suggest you go and find the contact information at emmer.house.gov. All right, let's get started. Last week was a big transportation week as we passed the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. So I wanted to start with a transportation question. Jake from Ramsey via our website writes, Highway 10 is a mess. Our road system in the Twin Cities is horrible. Governor Dayton and the Met Council are pushing funds away. What are you doing to help us? Well, I'll tell you what, Jake. The first thing is you're going to have a renaissance. I believe the long term is we're going to have a renaissance in this thing called federalism. What does that mean? It means that we here in Congress have to recognize what our founders created, which was a republic. In other words, the states, you probably have heard, are supposed to be the laboratories of democracy. What does that mean when it comes to transportation? Well, we need to empower our state and local officials. And I'm not just talking about state and county officials. I'm talking about state, county, and municipal officials to keep more of our tax dollars at home. You realize that for every dollar Minnesota sends to the federal government, we see back roughly 73 cents. Imagine what it would do to our transportation budget if we kept more of those dollars at home rather than sending them to Washington, D.C., having the middleman take out a certain percentage to fund things here in Washington, and then sending back what is left over. Imagine if we kept more of that money at home and we empowered our state, county, and local municipal officials to direct it, focus it on projects that are most important to Minnesotans and the greatest need. I think that's the future. In the meantime, we're starting to move in that direction. The bill that we passed last week does, in fact, change some of the transportation funding, turns it into a block grant funding. In other words, we're going to take the money, we're going to give it back to the state, and granted, the future is we don't send it to Washington in the first place. But this bill will empower states, local authorities, and all the way down to the city level, as I understand it, to make the transportation decisions that are most important to the communities being impacted. In other words, the dollars will go directly there. We got a long way to go. I don't want to tell you it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it definitely is a step in the right direction. That's where it begins, Jake. George from Buffalo wrote in also on our website, Tom, you were recently added to the Financial Services Committee. What's the committee like? What are you and the committee working on? Well, the committee, I like it, George, because the Financial Services Committee is one of what they call 4A committees. I don't know why they chose the letter A. I think the 4 committees, it's Financial Services, it's Energy and Commerce, it's Appropriations, and Ways and Means. Those 4 committees in the House have real-time jurisdiction over things, whether it be the financial industry or anything else that spends money or has real-time impact on Americans. Those 4 committees have that real-time impact. And when it comes to financial services, it's the financial services industry, which includes insurance, all across this country, and frankly, it touches the globe. What we do on this committee, what happens in the Financial Services Committee in the House and the Banking Committee in the Senate, can have a immediate impact on the United States of America and frankly on markets here at home and abroad. That to me is that makes the committee more exciting. The things that we're doing can impact our people at home. And what are we working on right now? Well, after the 2008 crash, Congress, as it's been known to do, has to spring into action and come up with what they believe is a solution. Prior to 2008, our Federal Reserve, as I understand it, as I've come to learn while being on this committee, had people embedded in large financial institutions in the country who were there to be keeping an eye on what was happening so they could sound the alarm in the event it was going to be a major financial catastrophe around the country, if we were going to a meltdown. They didn't do it. There was no warning. So what did we do? Well, I wasn't here. I've only been here for the last year, but the Congress, after the 2008 meltdown, they didn't change that. They actually added to it. In other words, they created Dodd-Frank with a whole host of new bureaucracies, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the FSOC, which is actually the Financial Stability Oversight Council, the Office of Financial Research, and the list goes on. I think it's a lot of extra on top of what already didn't work. But rather than get into the discussion of whether it should go or stay, we're trying to address the problems that we've come to see with these appointed and they're appointed bureaucracies that are not subject to supervision of Congress. So the CFPB, we've been trying to make them more accountable to Congress, more transparent. I've got specific legislation relating to reform of the Financial Stability Oversight Council that would require the council to come into the Financial Services Committee and answer questions directly to us, have their budget under our supervision and approval, as well as Congress's. And why is that important? Well, we want it to, if we're going to have it, it should work. And the problem we're having is nobody knows how they operate internally. Nobody knows how they make their decisions, how they designate, for instance, MetLife as a bank that's too big to fail. How do you designate an insurance company as a bank that's too big to fail? And if you agree with that, you may know more than I do, but if you agree with that, what if MetLife wants to get out of that designation because of all the enhanced regulatory requirements that come with it? How do they get out of that designation? Do they have to sell off a piece of their business? Do they have to do something differently? These are things that, if Congress is to do its job, it's got to make sure that government, once again, works for the people and not the other way around. So that's what the Financial Services Committee has been trying to work on in the 6 months that I've been a member. Next, Michael from St. Cloud sent an email to us, and here's the question. Another shooting and still no action by our Congress. Isn't it time to get your colleagues together and get something done? Michael, I appreciate your concern, and frankly, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I read frustration in your question, frustration that's shared by a lot of us. And we are trying to do some things. In fact, there's a major mental health reform bill that's making its way through the U.S. House of Representatives. Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania is the author. I believe I'm one of the co-authors of the bill. It's hopefully going to make it through the House and to the Senate and ultimately to the President's desk. Why? Well, because it doesn't matter if it's a shooting or some other heinous act where individuals are being harmed, senseless acts. It's related to mental health. I don't care what the weapon of choice is. The person that's carrying out these terrible acts has some serious mental health issues. Even though we've come a long way in the last 20, 30, 40 years in terms of identifying and maybe mainstreaming mental health challenges that we have in our society, there still seems to be a stigma. There still seem to be occasions where families may not want to report a family member who's having some major challenges. And we need to take care of those. We need to make sure that we can identify these people long before they reach a point that they're going to harm someone else or in the community, and we need to get them the help that they need. So Congress is acting. Unfortunately, and I hate to echo one of our presidential candidates, but our press doesn't seem to want to report on that. I've gotten a couple of questions on the declaration of war, the resolution that I filed for a declaration of war against the Islamic State. I introduced it right before Thanksgiving, and Nick wrote to me via Twitter to ask, honest question, how can you legally declare war on a stateless enemy, no flag, no uniform? I'm going to tell you, Nick, if that's the basis of creating a state, that you have to have a uniform, and you have to have a flag. And by the way, I think ISIS does have a lot of branding. These are animals, but animals who understand technology, animals who understand marketing. They're using these skills, though, to radicalize people. How do I declare war? How do I suggest we declare war? Well, first off, the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, says that Congress shall have the power to declare war. But our founders created a system where we would only have one commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief is exactly what it says. He, at this point, maybe she in the future, has the responsibility to make sure that they act on that declaration. When it comes to ISIS or the Islamic State or whatever they want to call themselves, two things I would say to you with regard to why a declaration of war applies to them. First, they call themselves a state. We should treat them as one. Second, they have taken over vast areas of geography that they now control. I don't think we sit around and argue about whether or not that constitutes a state. The fact is they are literally controlling ground, and they are expanding that ground every day. And I guess along those lines, the other thing I would say to you is that 10 million people right now, it's estimated, 10 million people get up every day under the rule of these barbarians, of these savages, of these animals. So you can either sit back, in my view, you can either sit back and argue about things like, well, the United Nations hasn't declared them a state yet, so we can't do anything. Or you can argue with the president. You can do what Congress has been doing since I got here a year ago, argue with the president about an authorization to use military force in Washington speak, in AUMF. You know, we're going to tell the president, the commander-in-chief, we're going to tell the commander-in-chief, this is how we think you should vanquish these animals. No. The Constitution says you do it by declaring war. Congress declares war, and what that tells the executive, if the declaration is made, is that the executive has any and every resource at his disposal to destroy this enemy of not only the United States, the citizens in our homeland, but of all freedom-loving people around the globe. I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's why I'm going to continue to push this. So I appreciate the question. Hope from Monticello asks, last week you voted on resolutions of disapproval against the Clean Power Plan. Don't you think it's important to protect our environment? Hope, love your question. You know, and I said this to somebody that I have a lot of respect for at the Humphrey Institute, Larry Jacobs, about a month ago. Larry brought up this question about the environment. And I said, hey, Larry, why do we always have to start there? Why do we start from a place where this group will get 100 scientists, that group will get 100 scientists, and before you know it, we're just all going to argue about cause and effect and everything else? Why don't we start, Hope, from where you and I agree? We both want clean air, I suspect. We both like clean water. We probably both believe, I know I do, and I'm assuming you do, that it's our moral obligation to try and leave this planet in a better condition than we found it for future generations. If you start from that perspective, then I think it's easier for us to get on the same page. How do we get there? I mean, the Clean Power Plan, it's when it comes to the United States, we've done more to reduce carbon emissions. We've done more to clean our air and our water than any other country on the face of the planet. We're way ahead of every other country on the face of the planet. And when you talk about taking care of our environmental concerns, it doesn't mean that you bite off your nose to spite your face. In other words, we can do more. We can do more things more efficiently. we can have an all of the above energy policy and protect the planet at the same time. And if you'd like, I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you about that in detail. In the meantime, I have an executive, a president in the Oval Office, who seems to ignore the rule of law and is not interested in participating in the people's process, the legislative process. Instead, because he is unwilling to engage in this discussion with policymakers who have been sent here by the people we work for, those voters that put us in office. You don't enact laws in this state, Hope, by a stroke of a pen. You do it through the people. So when it comes to the Clean Power Plan, you're right. I did vote for that resolution. I would do it again. In the meantime, we have to have a real and honest discussion about how we balance our ability to take care of the environment, to not only protect our water and our air and leave this place better than we found it, but how we continue to increase our quality of life, and not just for a few, for everybody. Thank you for that question. Gary from St. Francis sends an email asking the following. Why is the House reacting so quickly to the immigrants coming from Syria? It's a great question, I think. I mean, for me, I really don't have a question why we're reacting. You know, it's the president unilaterally. I give you two things, Gary. First, the president, again, in the United States of America, is not supposed to be a monarch, is not supposed to be a ruler. The president is the executive, and Congress is sent here, the 435 of us in the U.S. House of Representatives and the 100 senators are sent here to actually represent the states collectively and the citizens of those states, the people that vote for us, that we work for. And our number one obligation by virtue of the Constitution, in fact, the reason that our founders created this republic was in the federal government, the central government, was to protect American citizens and their property. Our number one obligation is to make sure that you're safe. The president wants to open up the gates and allow the Syrian refugees in. He said 10,000 in one statement. He might have said more in another. We should have nothing against people who want to come to this country and create a better life and be safe and become Americans and participate in this great experiment that our founders created 230 some years ago. But we have to be very concerned with these particular refugees, because we know that some have already found their way into Western Europe. We need to make sure that we don't create a needless danger for American citizens. And there's no way for us right now, according to the Director of Homeland Security and the Director of our FBI, there's no way for us to guarantee that every Syrian refugee is safe and not a threat to American citizens. Until we can do that, I will object to bringing any Syrian refugees into this country. As soon as we can certify that they are who they say they are and that they are not a threat to Americans or to our homeland, by all means, we'd love to have them. Christine on Facebook comments about GMOs, one of my favorite topics, genetically modified organisms. And Christine's question is this: if the Republican Party is always saying less federal control and more state control, why are you in favor of taking away the rights of states to decide if GMOs should be labeled? Well, I'm not taking away the rights of states to decide what to do with their labels, but we are setting a standard, because here's the problem, Christine. What is a GMO? What's your definition? I mean, I can, much like our question a little bit ago about the environment, Hope's question, we can get a whole bunch of scientists that'll tell us this is a genetically modified organism. This one is just natural evolution. This one, at the end of the day, the federal government does have a place in certain instances to set a standard so that you don't have a patchwork of different requirements all across the 50 states. And quite frankly, I was most worried about people like you, because if we allow that to happen, what you're suggesting, and we had seen it in Vermont and we saw it in a couple of other places beginning, if we had 50 jurisdiction plus one, the District of Columbia, all setting different labeling standards for foods, you wouldn't have the choices that you have right now. I think what's important is that the companies actually have a minimum standard that they have to disclose, and then it's not a matter, they can list on the label what's in the product, so that you, much like my wife does all the time, she wants to make sure whatever we're eating, whatever she's feeding us, has as little and preferably no additives and extras in it, because she's concerned about our long-term health, which I assume that's what you're concerned about. But this is an ongoing discussion, so I would add this. I don't think it's a states' rights versus central government at this point, but at some point it could rise to that level, because I think there are some people that would like to just see it all get squished into the central government, the federal government, and ignore the states, and I don't think that should happen. But in this instance, I do think we did the right thing for you and everybody else. Susan from Waconia sends a question on emmer.house.gov/asktom, which is on our website. And here's Susan's question. With Speaker Ryan in charge now, do you think Congress will get our fiscal house in order? You know what, Susan? That's a great question. And I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon and tell you that that's a certainty in the future. I will tell you that I'm very pleased with the new speaker in the first few weeks. Granted, he's inherited some things which are not of his own making, and he's trying to clean those up. I think the last one will be the budget bill coming up sometime this week if we're lucky. But going into the future, what he has assured everyone on the Republican side, and I'm told that he's shared this with the Democrats and their leadership, is he's going to open up the process. He's going to empower members all the way from the newest to the most experienced, the longest serving, to participate at the ground level. What does that mean? There will be a subcommittee process. There will be a full committee process. If legislation, if good ideas find their way through that debate, Republicans and Democrats through the committee process, it'll find its way maybe to the floor. And if that idea finds its way to the floor, it will be subject to amendment. This is something that hasn't been happening. Perfect example is we passed a transportation bill, and we passed there were two bills, an education bill in the last week. Both of them went to a conference committee, and I assume you know what it is, Susan, so I don't need to talk down to anybody who's out there as if you don't know this. But for those who may not know, what happens is the U.S. House of Representatives passes a transportation bill. The Senate passes a transportation bill. If they are not identical, then the leadership in both of those bodies appoints a smaller group of representatives, senators and representatives, who serve on a conference committee and hammer out the differences. And they take that conference report, as it's called, and they send it back for a vote in both full bodies once it's done. I'm told that hasn't happened in over a decade in the House of Representatives, and we had two of them last week. Now, this is a good sign. And if we can start to move in this direction, there's a lot of us who have come here in the last 5 years. In fact, you may not know this. A lot of people like to think that everybody just stays in Washington, they never leave. There are currently 246 Republican members of the 435-member U.S. House. Of the 246 of us, more than 50% have been elected in just the last 5 years. And those of us who have arrived in the last 5 years, at least as far as I can tell to a person, believe the problem is spending, federal government spending. It's our debt that we're leaving for future generations, and it's government's unwillingness to curb its appetite for spending. That should bode well. Open up the process, allow people to participate, and watch the ideas that come, and the fiscal responsibility should follow. But let's have this discussion again in a few months, and I can give you a report on how far we've come. Next question. Speaking of education, Lisa expressed her disapproval for my vote on the education bill and asked, quote, "Why did you vote to reauthorize No Child Left Behind?" Well, Lisa, that's not the way I see it at all. In fact, according to the Wall Street Journal, one outfit that wrote about it, this was the greatest devolution, in other words, unwinding of federal control over education, which the federal government should not be involved in the first place. This was the largest, greatest devolution of federal involvement in education in 25 years. Why? Because, and look, the bill wasn't perfect. I would have loved to have seen the spending reduced. The spending was not reduced. We passed a bill out of the House that cut 65 programs. The one that came back in that conference report only cut 49. But think about it for a second. Only cut 49. We cut 49 federal education programs in this bill. When's the last time that's happened? We also delinked the money. We delinked the money from the federal government and we turned it over to local control. That's a huge step, even though it's small in the overall scheme of things. That's the beginning. And then finally, for me, we cut off the requirement that states have to follow Common Core. States are now allowed, by virtue of this law, to opt out of Common Core, to choose not to use the Common Core curriculum without penalty or fear of penalty from the federal government. This, again, doesn't solve the overall problem because you're going to have to be active. You're going to have to be active at your local level. You're going to have to be working with your school board members. You're going to have to make sure that your school board members are not only a rubber stamp of the administration and what comes from St. Paul. You're going to have to make sure that you're there, that you're standing up, that you're speaking up, and that you're making sure your voice is heard. If you do that, then you and I together, I think this bill was actually a good, small step, but first step forward. Next question. Over the past year, the VA has been in the news quite a bit, and it's an issue that my office has been heavily involved in. Tim from St. Cloud sent me an email asking the question, that's the bell that rings when they're opening the house again. Tim, your question. We love our St. Cloud VA. We don't need anyone politicizing the issues here. Are you trying to fix the problem or make it worse? Well, Tim, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that's why we've handled it the way we have. Tim Walz, Representative Tim Walz, a Democrat from Minnesota's 1st Congressional District and someone who serves on the Armed Services Committee and has been heavily involved in VA issues, joined me. One of the reasons is because we're trying not to politicize this issue. We've got some great people that work at our VAs, not just in St. Cloud, but all across the country. Unfortunately, because of the acts of some, all have been impacted. In St. Cloud, our job is really to try and help bring the employees and management together. It was clear to me we had a listening session with employees at the St. Cloud VA, and we actually sat down and listened to the union representatives and later with management. It's clear, and I think management acknowledges, that there had been a breakdown of communication, breakdown of trust between the two. The idea is getting them, and they did agree to submit to federal mediation. I understand it's taking place next month to try and resolve those issues. But I would be remiss, Tim, if I just said everything is great and ignored other information that people are giving us. And hopefully we've taken care of it, but if there's anything else that's there, again, we got great people at the VA. They do a wonderful job. They're committed to our military servicemen and women and our veterans. We want to make sure that they can hold their head high because they're working in an institution that's above reproach. If there's one bad apple in the group, it's our job to make sure that we take care of that. So hopefully we've done that. Hopefully we're well on our way to making sure that the VA continues with its reputation, its great reputation in the St. Cloud and surrounding areas. So thanks for your question. Luann from Merritt sends an email, and her question is, when can we expect Congress to consider updating the law that makes charitable contributions directly from IRAs to be non-taxable income? Sure would be helpful if this could be accomplished before year end. Luann, I could not agree with you more. This is part of the tax extenders package. That's probably more Washington speak than you care to hear. But what does that mean? There are different tax laws that before I got here, Congress has been enacting on an annual basis. Frankly, it's no way to run a railroad. For business, for people to plan and prepare, they need certainty. You need stability. You need to be able to see off into the future. And when Congress is passing something that lasts 1 year and then has to be renewed, how can you plan on that? But that's where we're at right now. We passed legislation out of the House to do exactly what you asked with IRAs, to make those charitable contributions non-taxable. We passed it several months ago, but that bill, I understand, is not going anywhere. The tax extender bill, which would be a whole bunch of these, including, for those of you that are in business out there, Chapter 179, which is the ability to depreciate capital purchases, things like that, are in a package of tax extenders. That bill right now is being worked on as part of the bigger budget bill. I understand that our leadership is working for a 2-year agreement so that you don't have to worry about it expiring at the end of 2016. But knowing the way this place has worked recently, and we hope it changes in the future, I wouldn't be surprised if we just get a 1-year deal, which would pass hopefully as part of this budget deal this week. We'll see. Next question. Continuing with taxes, I guess. Andrew on Twitter asked this question. Our country's tax system is outdated, unfair, and in much need of reform. Where do you stand on this issue? Andrew, we got to scrap the code. We got to fundamentally change the way we pay for government services. I'm a co-author of the fair tax. I'm a believer in the flat tax. At the end of the day, I believe we have to start thinking out of the box, and frankly, to get the United States to that road to prosperity, to see everyone succeed, to get this economic engine rolling the way it could and should. I think the key is going to be real tax reform, not new income, not new tax revenue streams, not reshuffling the cards, the tax cards, but literally taking that code, which, what is it now, about yay thick? The IRS can't even tell you how some of the things in it work. We need to pitch that eventually. We need to completely rebuild our tax system. We could be so efficient. We could be, my belief is, people want to pay for the services they get. If it was transparent, if it was simple, if it was easy to understand, it would probably do more good for this country than maybe any other policy changes we can make. So that's where I stand. Next, Judy from Anoka is frustrated with Obamacare, and she writes, my experience with the Obamacare has been an absolute nightmare. My plan was canceled, and my new plan is nearly tripled in price. I'm not sure why it is called the Affordable Care Act, because it certainly is not affordable. What are you going to do to help healthcare become more affordable for Minnesotans? You know what, Judy, your story is is becoming more and more common. Yes, there are people out there who have had a good result with Obamacare, with the Affordable Care Act legislation, but they're few. There are few. The vast majority of the people that I represent have been and are being harmed by this act. It has increased deductibles. It has diluted coverage. And I don't mean to get into the partisan end of it, but when the president says, if you like your plan, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. They knew that wasn't true, and it's not true. And now people in my state, people in our state, my district, the district I represent, are getting hit with gargantuan premium increases and ridiculous things like I have a gentleman who I know who is disabled. He has a progressive condition. He has to get his blood checked all the time. He goes in for regular checkups, and it used to be that he could go in for the checkup, have his blood drawn, get the checkup, get the blood test, all in the same visit. He called me a couple weeks ago, and he was livid because now he has to drive to a different lab to get his blood drawn. Then they have to do whatever they're doing and get the report back to him later. And he said, it's not going to help him with his condition. These types of stories, we gotta keep hearing, because the future is freedom of choice. The future is reestablishing the patient-doctor relationship and trying to get the government out of that relationship. We had some insurance issues. We have, and we don't want to lose it, the greatest health care in the world. I tell you, I think we're having some problems right now because of the Unaffordable Care Act. But as soon as we have a change in the executive office, I think we'll see more appetite for change with the Affordable Care Act. Thanks for the question, Judy. Paul from Forest Lake asks about a piece of legislation that I sponsored. And this is the question. Paul writes, I recently heard that you introduced a bill entitled the Cuba Trade Act of 2015. Do you really think improving relations and working with the brutal Castro regime will help improve the lives of the Cuban people? Paul, I wouldn't have offered the legislation if I didn't think so. Absolutely, I think so. The definition of insanity, I've been told many, many times, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. The Cuban embargo has existed for going on 55 years. I think it turned 55, as a matter of fact, last month. No, October. 55 years. What was the purpose of the embargo? The purpose of the embargo was to undermine the Castro regime, to give the Cuban people the opportunity to self-determine once again and self-govern. How's that worked? If the embargo, I mean, how has it worked? We've gone through, is it 11 presidents? And where are we at today compared to where we were when the embargo was instituted? If the embargo was ever going to have worked, it should have worked in the 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed, when Cuban people were literally starving. And all the embargo did was it empowered the Castro regime to be able to point at the United States of America and tell the Cuban people, that's why you're starving. I don't think it's the right policy. I think it was Pope John Paul who said an embargo actually hurts the people most who it's intended to help. That's the case with Cuba. And for me, freedom is a storm. Once you start to allow the free market into your society, just ask the Chinese, and is it perfect in China? No, it's not perfect by any means, but it has begun. Once you allow the free market into your society, you empower the individual to improve his or her life. Isn't that what we want? This is all about the Cuban people. Add to that the Castros, Raul Castro has already announced he'll be stepping down in 2018. There will be a transition in Cuba in 2018, and I think it behooves the United States of America to be there. Why? Cuba is one of the keys to our national security in the Western Hemisphere. I prefer that the United States move in the direction of being involved with the Cuban people as opposed to leaving it in a vacuum and allowing a Putin or a Kim Jong-un, or you name your dictator, you name your global bully. I'd rather have that, have America there than the United States, rather than see one of them move in and fill that vacuum. So that's why I offered the Cuba Trade Act of 2015. So I'm getting the word. This will be the last question, and it's from Janet on Facebook. Janet wants to know, what regulations harm Main Street? Wow. Janet, can you tell me what regulations don't harm Main Street? I think when you live in a civil society, one of the reasons that we have a civil society, one of the reasons people live together, is they come up with this contract. In our case, for the United States of America, the contract is the U.S. Constitution. At a state level, we have the state constitution, right? And what do? We give up certain things individually, you and I do. We agree to abide by certain laws. We agree to do certain things because we want to be part of civil society. But there comes a point when government starts to grow, and the regulations that you start to get are trying to control us from our own behavior. Frankly, any regulation that stands in the way of you or anyone else on Main Street being able to reach for your full potential in terms of your economic security, your lifestyle, your quality of life, I think that's a problem. That's a problem, especially when those things don't impact those around you. We got to get government off people's backs. We got to give people back more of their hard-earned resources, and we've got to trust people. We've got to trust people, the individual, to do not only what's best for himself or herself, but by doing what's best for himself or herself, by improving the lot for all of us, rather than what some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would say. They prefer to trust government. Well, there's got to be a balance. I prefer to trust you. Well, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today on this Twitter town hall. Like I mentioned before, in addition to our in-person town halls and the teletown halls, my office likes to use social media to be as accessible as possible. If you want to participate in future town halls, be sure to visit emmer.house.gov/coffee for more information. Being accessible to you and all Minnesotans throughout the 6th Congressional District is of utmost importance to me. If I can ever be of service, please don't hesitate to contact either of our offices. And remember, you can always find all the contact information at emmer.house.gov. Thanks for all your time, and hope to see you all soon. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays.